Have you ever felt judged the moment you walked into a room? For 16-year-old Audrey Thompson, the judgment happened at an airport check-in counter. She was holding a first-class ticket for her dream trip, a ticket 2 airline employees decided she couldn't possibly deserve. They laughed at her, accused her of fraud, and tried to publicly humiliate her in front of a terminal full of strangers. They thought they were putting a teenager in her place. What they didn't know was that the name on her emergency contact wasn't just her uncle. It was the head of operations for the entire airline. This isn't just a story of racism. It's a story of breathtaking karma served colder than the air at 30,000 feet. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 vibrated with a unique kind of energy, a chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases, hurried announcements, and 1,000 overlapping conversations in a dozen languages. For 16-year-old Audrey Thompson, it was the sound of freedom. Clutched in her hand was a ticket folder, its crisp edges already softening from her nervous grip. Inside was a single boarding pass for Transatlantic Airways Flight 1201 to London Heathrow. Seat 2A. First class. This wasn't just a flight. It was a launch pad. For the past 2 years, Audrey had dedicated every spare moment to her passion for aerospace engineering. She wasn't just good at it. She was exceptional. Her designs for more efficient winglets won the state science fair, and her coding for a flight path optimization algorithm had earned her a scholarship to a prestigious summer program at MIT. But this trip was different. This was the big one. Her uncle David Sterling had arranged a 1-month internship for her at the TAA European headquarters in London. She wouldn't be fetching coffee. She'd be shadowing the logistics and operations team, the very nerve center that kept thousands of planes flying safely across the globe. Her parents had been hesitant to let her travel alone internationally, but Uncle David was their rock. He was her mother's older brother, the one who'd left their modest neighborhood in Queens to build a life in the corporate world. He was brilliant driven, and to Audrey, he was a superhero who just happened to work for an airline. He had always encouraged her ambitions, sending her complex textbooks and models, treating her not as a child, but as a future colleague. When he'd called with the internship offer, it felt like the world had cracked open, revealing a path she'd only dreamed of walking. "Okay, sweetie, your gate is B32, her mum said, her voice trembling slightly as she fussed with the collar of Audrey's jacket. "You have your passport. Your phone is fully charged. You know to call us the second you land." "Mum, I'll be fine." Audrey laughed, though her own heart was hammering against her ribs. "Uncle David has a car waiting for me. I've gone over the plan 100 times. Her dad enveloped her in a hug that smelled of his familiar old spice and unwavering support. "We are so proud of you, Audrey. You go over there and show them what a Thompson can do, and don't forget to eat. The English, they boil everything." They shared a final tearful goodbye at the security checkpoint, and then Audrey was on her own. Navigating the serpentine lines of TSA was a rite of passage, and she emerged on the other side feeling a little more grown up, a little more independent. The vast departures hall stretched before her a galaxy of high-end shops and bustling restaurants. But Audrey had her eyes on the prize, the exclusive TAA International First Class Lounge. Uncle David had insisted she use it. "You're traveling as a VIP guest of the airline, Audrey," he'd said over the phone. "Get the full experience. You've earned it." She found the first-class check-in lane, a serene oasis cordoned off by plush red ropes. There was no line. A single agent sat behind a polished mahogany counter, typing languidly on her keyboard. Audrey took a deep breath, walked forward, and placed her passport and ticket folder on the counter. "Good morning," Audrey said, her voice clear and bright. "I'm checking in for Flight 1201 to Heathrow." The woman behind the counter, whose name tag read Brenda Gallagher, looked up. She was in her late 40s, with hair dyed a brassy blonde and a face set in a permanent state of mild disapproval. Her eyes flicked from Audrey's face to her neat cornrows to her stylish but not extravagant clothes, and finally down to the first-class ticket. A tiny, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corner of her lips. First class. Brenda asked, her voice dripping with a saccharine skepticism that immediately put Audrey on edge. She picked up the ticket as if it were a curious artifact. "That's a very expensive ticket for a young lady like yourself traveling alone." Audrey felt a prickle of unease. It was a gift, she said politely, trying to keep her tone neutral. Brenda hummed a non-committal tune as she typed Audrey's information into the system. The clacking of the keys was slow, deliberate. "A very generous gift. Your name is Audrey Thompson." "Yes, ma'am. And who purchased this ticket for you?" "Ms. Thompson." The question felt oddly personal, invasive. It wasn't a security question. It was an interrogation. My Uncle Audrey replied, her smile faltering. "He works for the airline." This seemed to pique Brenda's interest. The smirk widened. "Oh, really? What's his name?" "Does he clean the planes?" She chuckled, a dry, rattling sound as if sharing a private joke with herself. The casual cruelty of the question struck Audrey like a slap. Suddenly, she wasn't a promising young engineer on the trip of a lifetime. She was just a black girl who in this woman's eyes couldn't possibly belong here. "His name is David Sterling," Audrey said, her voice colder now. "And no, he doesn't clean the planes." Brenda's fingers paused over the keyboard. She squinted at the screen, then back at Audrey, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing her features before being replaced by hardened suspicion. "David Sterling. I don't see a staff discount or family travel authorization code on this booking. This ticket was paid for in full with a corporate black card." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, sweetie, if you found this ticket, or if someone gave it to you who shouldn't have, it's better to just come clean now. We can put you in an economy seat, no harm, no foul. But if you try to board with a fraudulent ticket, it becomes a federal offense." Audrey's blood ran cold. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate accusation. "It's not fraudulent," Audrey insisted, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "It's my ticket. My uncle is David Sterling. Please just check me in." Brenda leaned back in her chair, a look of triumph on her face. She picked up the phone on her desk. "Oh, I'll be checking all right." She turned her body slightly away from Audrey, but spoke loud enough for her and anyone nearby to hear. "Mark, could you come to the first-class desk? I've got a situation here." "Yeah." A young girl with a rather imaginative story. The man who arrived a moment later, Mark Jensen, was the physical embodiment of a sneer. He was lanky and pale, with a thin moustache that seemed to accentuate the permanent downward curve of his mouth. He sauntered over from the nearby business-class counter, his TAA uniform, looking rumpled and ill-fitting. He leaned against the counter next to Brenda, crossing his arms and looking Audrey up and down with an expression of bored amusement. "What's the problem, Bren?" he asked, not even bothering to make eye contact with Audrey. "Our guest here," Brenda began, tapping Audrey's ticket with a long acrylic nail is claiming this full-fare international first-class ticket is hers, a gift from her uncle, David Sterling. She said the name with exaggerated air quotes. Funny thing is, the system shows it was purchased with a TAA executive black card, and there are no family travel notes on the PNR. Mark let out a low whistle. Executive card, huh? Big shot. Let me guess, this uncle is the CEO. He finally looked at Audrey, a smirk playing on his lips. What's he do? Sweetie pilot. The fancy jets. Audrey's hands were clenched into fists at her sides. Her face burned with the shame she didn't deserve. The line at the economy check-in was long, and she could feel dozens of eyes on her. They weren't staring with sympathy, but with the detached curiosity of people watching a minor drama unfold a brief distraction from their own travel anxieties. I don't know his exact title, Audrey said, forcing herself to meet Mark's condescending gaze. He's in corporate management. He's very senior. If you just look him up in the company directory, you'll see. Brenda scoffed. Honey, we can't just look people up because a teenager claims to know them. That's not how security works. She slid the passport and ticket back across the counter, stopping it just short of Audrey's reach. The fact is, you are a minor traveling alone with a ticket that has several red flags on it. We don't believe it's yours, but it has my name on it. My passport matches. Audrey's voice cracked frustration warring with the desperate need to remain calm. She knew that if she got emotional, they would see it as proof of her guilt. Oh, that's easy enough to do, Mark chimed in, waving a dismissive hand. Stolen credit card, book a ticket online with a fake name that matches a lost or stolen passport. We see it all the time. People get desperate to get out of the country. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. You in some kind of trouble? The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. He was implying she was a runaway, a criminal. The dream trip, the internship, the culmination of all her hard work. It was all dissolving into this sordid, ugly scene on the floor of Terminal 4. I am not in trouble, Audrey said, her voice dangerously low. I am a student on my way to an internship. My Uncle David Sterling is expecting me. I have his number. I can call him right now. She fumbled for her phone, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped it. Go right ahead, Brenda said with a magnanimous wave. Call your uncle. We'll wait. The way she said it made it clear she believed it was a bluff. Mark chuckled and turned to a colleague at the next counter, muttering something that made the other man laugh. Audrey felt a wave of profound isolation. These people held all the power. They could deny her boarding call security and ruin everything, all based on a judgment they'd made the second they saw her face. She found her uncle's contact, Uncle David, and pressed the call button. Her heart pounded in her ears as it rang. Once, twice. The terminal's noise seemed to fade into a dull roar. Voicemail. Hi, you've reached David Sterling. I'm currently in a meeting. Please leave a message or send a text and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Audrey's stomach plummeted. Of course. It was 10 a.m. in New York. He was at the North American headquarters. He was probably in the middle of his big weekly operations meeting. She hung up, her face falling. Brenda's smile was predatory. No answer. What a surprise. Must be a very busy man, that uncle of yours. He's in a meeting, Audrey whispered, feeling her last ounce of fight draining away. They're always in a meeting, Mark sneered. Look, kid, we're done playing games. The ticket is flagged as suspicious. We're not checking you in. You can step aside and wait for Port Authority security to come and ask you a few questions, or you can buy yourself a new ticket. In economy. He gestured vaguely toward the massive snaking line for the regular check-in counters. Your choice. Tears welled in Audrey's eyes, hot and stinging. She wouldn't let them see her cry. She refused to give them that satisfaction. She blinked them back fiercely. I am not moving, she said, her voice shaking but firm. This is my seat on that plane. You are making a mistake. Brenda's face hardened, her facade of syrupy condescension vanishing. All right, you asked for it. She picked up the phone again. I need Port Authority at the TAA first class check-in. We have a possible fraudulent ticket situation, a minor uncooperative. The words echoed in the cavernous space. Fraudulent, uncooperative. Labels she would never be able to peel off. The dream was over. She was going to be questioned by police, her parents would be called, and her uncle, would be so disappointed. She had failed before she had even begun. She sent him a quick, desperate text, her thumbs clumsy on the screen. Uncle David, they won't let me check in. They think the ticket is fake and are calling security. Please, please call me. She hit send and stood her ground, a solitary, defiant figure in the middle of the polished airport floor, waiting for her world to fall apart. The wait for security felt like an eternity. Each second stretched and warped, filled with the weight of prying eyes and the low murmur of gossip from the economy line. Audrey could hear snippets of conversation. Can you believe the nerve? Probably one of those mules. Her parents must be worried sick. Every comment was a fresh stab of humiliation. She stood ramrod straight, focusing on a departures board across the hall, watching the letters and numbers flicker and change, trying to anchor herself to anything other than the disaster unfolding around her. Brenda and Mark had retreated into a smug bubble of self-satisfaction. They stood together, speaking in low tones, occasionally glancing over at Audrey with expressions that mingled pity and scorn. They had done their duty. They had protected the airline from a potential grifter. In their minds, they were the heroes of this little drama. Audrey looked at her phone again. No response from Uncle David. The single grey check mark on her text message had turned to 2, indicating it had been delivered, but they remained stubbornly grey. Not blue. He hadn't read it. Her last hope was sitting unread in the pocket of a man in a boardroom miles away. She thought about her parents, her mom's anxious face, her dad's proud hug. She had promised them she would be fine, that she was mature enough to handle this. Now she imagined the phone call they would receive from a Port Authority officer. Ma'am, we have your daughter in custody at JFK. The thought made her feel physically ill. A young couple, probably on their honeymoon, approached the first-class counter. They were all smiles and excitement. Brenda greeted them with a dazzling, entirely fabricated warmth that was a world away from the cold suspicion she had shown Audrey. Good morning. Welcome to Transatlantic Airways First Class. Heading to London. I see wonderful choice. May I have your passports? Audrey watched the exchange, a fresh wave of injustice washing over her. The ease with which they were accepted, the deference. They were shown it was a privilege they hadn't even realized they had. The only difference between her and them was the color of her skin, and the assumptions Brenda had made because of it. It was so blatant, so fundamentally unfair, that the fear churning in her stomach began to curdle into a hard, cold knot of anger. 2 Port Authority officers finally appeared, their uniforms crisp, their expressions impassive. They were built like refrigerators, their presence immediately drawing even more attention to the scene. Brenda. You called the taller officer. asked his voice a low rumble. "Yes, Officer Miller," Brenda said, pointing a dramatic finger at Audrey. "This young woman is attempting to check in with a suspicious ticket. She has no verifiable connection to the purchaser, and her story keeps changing." "My story hasn't changed at all," Audrey thought, fury rising in her throat. "She claims her uncle bought the ticket, but was unable to reach him by phone," Mark added helpfully. "Classic story. We think she might be a runaway." Officer Miller turned his gaze on Audrey. It wasn't unkind, but it was searching professional. "Miss, can I see your identification, please?" Audrey numbly handed him her passport. He examined it, then looked at the ticket Brenda held out to him. "Audrey Thompson," he read. "And the ticket is for Audrey Thompson. They match. The purchase is the problem," Brenda insisted. "It's a corporate executive card. There's no way her family has access to something like that. It's flagged in our system for verbal verification." This was a lie. Audrey had seen Brenda's screen. There were no flashing red warnings, no alerts, just her booking details. The flag was in Brenda's mind, not in the computer. "Ma'am, what's your uncle's name?" the officer asked Audrey, his tone even. "David Sterling," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "And you can't reach him. He's in a meeting. I texted him." The officer nodded slowly. "Okay. Well, we need to verify your story. Until we can get in touch with this Mr. Sterling or your parents, we're going to have to ask you to come with us." This was it, the point of no return. Audrey's mind raced. What would they do? Put her in a holding room? Would she miss her flight? Would they cancel her internship? Her phone buzzed in her hand. The screen lit up with the name Uncle David. A tidal wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled her knees, crashed over her. She had never been so happy to see his name in her life. She answered it before the second buzz, her thumb jabbing at the screen. Uncle David. The name came out as a strangled sob. "Audrey, what's wrong? I just saw your text. What's this about not letting you check in? Are you okay?" His voice, usually so calm and measured, was laced with sharp concern. "No, I'm not okay," she said. Tears finally breaking free and streaming down her cheeks. She didn't care who saw them now. "They think I stole the ticket. They said it's fraudulent. They've called the police and they're about to take me away." There was a moment of dead silence on the other end of the line. Audrey could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the brilliant operational mind processing a crisis. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by a chillingly calm authority. It was a voice that didn't request things. It commanded them. "Audrey, listen to me very carefully. Do not go anywhere. Put the Port Authority officer on the phone." Audrey wiped her tears with the back of her hand and held the phone out to Officer Miller. "It's my uncle," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He wants to speak with you." The officer looked surprised but took the phone. Brenda and Mark exchanged a look of smug disbelief, certain this was just another part of the charade. "This is Officer Miller of the Port Authority," he said into the phone. He listened for a moment, his brow furrowing. Then his eyes widened slightly. "Yes, sir," he said, his posture straightening almost imperceptibly. He listened again, his gaze flicking from the phone to Audrey, then to a suddenly nervous-looking Brenda. "Yes, I understand completely. No, sir. She has not been moved. She's right here." He paused. "I will. Right away." He handed the phone back to Audrey. His entire demeanor toward her had shifted. The professional detachment was gone, replaced by a look of dawning respect and a hint of apology. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice now gentle. "Your uncle has asked that you stay right here. He's on his way." Audrey nodded, clutching the phone to her chest like a lifeline. "He's coming?" "Yes, ma'am. He said not to move and not to let anyone bother you." He turned to his partner. "Let's give the young lady some space." The two officers took a few steps back, creating a subtle but clear buffer between Audrey and the check-in desk. They were no longer investigating her. They were protecting her. The shift in the dynamic was immediate and palpable. Brenda and Mark, who had been whispering triumphantly, fell silent. A seed of doubt had been planted. "What did he say?" Brenda asked Officer Miller. A new shrill note in her voice. "He said to wait." The officer replied curtly, his face unreadable. Brenda's confidence began to fray at the edges. She looked at Mark, who simply shrugged, a bead of sweat now visible on his upper lip. This was not going according to their script. The teenage runaway wasn't breaking down or confessing. She had actually called someone. And that someone had a voice that made a Port Authority officer stand to attention. For the next 20 minutes, the area around the TAA first-class check-in desk was suspended in a state of tense silence. The honeymooning couple had been checked in and sent on their way, and no other passengers had arrived. It was just Audrey, her two new police escorts, and the increasingly agitated duo of Brenda and Mark. Audrey had managed to calm herself, her uncle's voice echoing in her ears. He was coming. Everything would be okay. She didn't know what he would do, but she knew her Uncle David. He was the calmest person she'd ever met, a man who managed global logistics crises involving grounded airplanes and volcanic ash clouds without ever raising his voice. But she also knew that beneath that calm exterior was a spine of pure, unyielding steel. A ripple of activity near the terminal entrance heralded his arrival. A man in a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit strode through the security checkpoint, flashing a high-level all-access airport ID badge that had the guards waving him through without a second glance. He moved with a purpose and quiet authority that made people instinctively step out of his way. He wasn't tall or physically imposing, but he commanded the space around him. It was David Sterling. His eyes scanned the check-in area and landed on Audrey. A brief look of relief washed over his face, followed by a flicker of cold fury as he took in the scene, his niece, tear-streaked and pale, being flanked by two police officers with Brenda and Mark standing behind the counter like two vultures. He walked directly to Audrey, ignoring everyone else. He put his hands on her shoulders and looked her in the eye. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and full of concern. "I am now," she whispered, the relief of his presence finally letting the last of her adrenaline drain away. He gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Good. Stay right here with the officers." Then he turned. The full, undivided attention of David Sterling fell upon Brenda Gallagher and Mark Jensen. He walked slowly toward the first-class counter, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. He didn't look angry. He looked something far worse, disappointed and analytical, like a scientist examining a failed experiment. He stopped in front of Brenda. He didn't say a word. He simply looked at her, his gaze unwavering, and then glanced down at her name tag. "Brenda Gallagher, Customer Service Supervisor." Brenda's face had gone completely white. The smugness, the condescension, the casual cruelty, it had all evaporated, replaced by a raw, primal fear. She recognized that look. It was the look of a man who could end her career with a single email. "Mr. Mr. Sterling. She stammered, her voice a pathetic squeak. I didn't know. We were just following procedure. David Sterling's expression didn't change. He simply slid his TAA executive ID across the counter towards her. It was black with a simple gold logo. Under his name, his title was printed in stark, clear letters. David Sterling, Head of Operations, North America. The silence that followed the presentation of the ID card was absolute. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the sound out of that corner of Terminal 4. Brenda Gallagher stared at the card, her mind visibly struggling to process the information. Head of Operations, North America. Not a baggage handler. Not a pilot. Not even a mid-level manager. She was standing before one of the most powerful executives in the entire company. The man who oversaw every flight, every crew member, and every single ground staff employee, including her, from the Arctic Circle to the Panama Canal. The corporate black card used to buy the ticket wasn't just a company card. It was likely his company card. Mark Jensen looked like he had seen a ghost. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, clammy pallor. He seemed to shrink in on himself, his lanky frame suddenly looking fragile and small. He unconsciously took a step back from the counter, as if trying to physically distance himself from Brenda and the catastrophic mistake they had made. David Sterling finally spoke, his voice dangerously quiet, yet it cut through the silence like a scalpel. Procedure. He repeated the single word, hanging in the air, heavy with condemnation. Tell me, Ms. Gallagher, which part of the TAA Code of Conduct instructs you to mock a 16-year-old passenger? We didn't mock her. Brenda stuttered, her eyes darting around, frantically, looking for an escape that wasn't there. We were just concerned. The ticket was flagged, was it? David interrupted, his tone razor sharp. Because I'm looking at the PNR on my own phone right now. I see no flags. I see no security alerts. I see a full-fare, first-class ticket, booked for my niece with a note in the endorsements box, which I put there myself, that reads, VIP guest of D. Sterling H. Ops N.A. Please extend all courtesies. He held up his phone, showing them the screen. You seem to have missed that note. Or did you choose to ignore it? Brenda opened and closed her mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. The lie had been exposed utterly and completely. David then turned his gaze to Mark. And you, he said, his voice laced with contempt. Your name is Mark Jensen. You felt it was appropriate to suggest my niece, a brilliant student on her way to a company-sponsored internship, was a runaway or a criminal. Is that the level of customer service TAA strives for in its premium cabins? No, sir, Mark stammered, wringing his hands. It was a misunderstanding. I was just trying to support my supervisor. A misunderstanding. David's voice rose just a fraction enough to make both of them flinch. My niece was publicly humiliated. She was accused of theft. You threatened her with federal prosecution and called law enforcement on her. What you call a misunderstanding, I call a disgusting abuse of authority, rooted in what I can only assume is a deep-seated, ugly prejudice. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He turned to Officer Miller, who had been watching the entire exchange with a grim expression. Officer, thank you for your professionalism. My niece and I will not be pressing charges against your department, as you were called here, under false pretenses. However, I will be filing a formal complaint with the Port Authority about the ease with which TAA employees can seemingly weaponize security against paying customers. Understood, sir. the officer said with a nod. He and his partner gave a final apologetic look to Audrey and walked away, their job now clearly over. David turned back to the petrified employees. "Ms. Gallagher, Mr. Jensen, hand me your airport and company ID badges." It was not a request. Brenda's hands trembled so violently she could barely unclip the badge from her blouse. Mark fumbled with his lanyard, his fingers clumsy and useless. They slid the plastic cards across the counter. David picked them up and slipped them into his suit pocket. "You are suspended effective immediately. Do not speak to any other TAA employees. Do not attempt to access any TAA systems. You are to leave airport property this instant. Someone from Human Resources will be in contact with you regarding the next steps of your separation from this company." The finality in his voice was absolute. This wasn't a warning. It was a verdict. He then looked past them, his eyes scanning the other check-in desks. Every single TAA employee was frozen watching the scene unfold in horror. His gaze landed on another supervisor, a woman who looked pale with shock. "You, David," called out his voice, sharp. The woman jumped. "Come here, please." She scurried over her face, a mask of anxiety. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Please check my niece in for her flight. To her assigned seat, 2A. Escort her to the first-class lounge personally and ensure she has everything she needs. Tell the lounge manager that she is my guest and her comfort is your absolute top priority." "Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." "Absolutely, sir," the woman said, nodding vigorously. "Good." David turned back to Audrey, the icy corporate fury melting away to be replaced by the warm concern of her uncle. He gently took her arm. "Let's get you sorted, kiddo." As the other supervisor frantically began processing Audrey's check-in, apologizing profusely with every keystroke, Brenda and Mark stood motionless, stripped of their badges and their authority. They were just two people in ill-fitting uniforms, facing the complete and utter demolition of their careers. As Audrey walked away with her new boarding pass, she glanced back one last time. Brenda was staring into the middle distance, her face a crumpled mess of disbelief and despair. The karma hadn't just knocked on her door, it had kicked it clean off the hinges. David Sterling did not leave the airport after ensuring Audrey was comfortably settled in the first-class lounge with a cup of tea and a promise that he would be back to see her off at the gate. Instead, he went straight to the TAA operations office, tucked away in the terminal's upper levels. The moment he walked in, the atmosphere shifted. He was no longer just Audrey's uncle. He was the head of operations, and a fire had been lit under his department. He immediately convened a conference call with Catherine Shaw, the Vice President of Human Resources for North America, and Michael Corrigan, the Director of JFK Ground Operations. "This is not a slap-on-the-wrist situation," Catherine David said, his voice calm but firm, pacing the length of the office. This was not a simple customer service failure. This was targeted harassment of a minor based on racial prejudice. It was malicious, it was unprofessional, and it happened in our flagship first-class cabin check-in. This is a cancer in our organization, and I want it cut out. Catherine Shaw, a no-nonsense lawyer by training, was already pulling up the employee files for Brenda Gallagher and Mark Jensen. "I'm looking at their records now, David. Gallagher has been with us for 12 years. A few minor complaints for rudeness over the years, but nothing that ever stuck. Jensen, 5 years clean record." "Clean records don't matter," David countered. "What matters is what I saw with my own eyes. They created a hostile environment, lied about company procedure, and escalated a situation to involve law enforcement for no reason other than their own biases. I want a full, immediate investigation. I want you to pull the CCTV footage from the check-in counter for the last hour. I want every employee who witnessed the interaction interviewed before their shift ends today. And I want you to run a deep dive on past passenger complaints filed against both Gallagher and Jensen. Cross-reference them for keywords rude, accusatory, unprofessional, discriminatory. I suspect this isn't the first time they've done this. It's just the first time they've done it to someone with my phone number. Michael Corrigan, the JFK director, sounded mortified. David, I am so sorry. I can't believe this happened on my watch. I'll personally oversee the interviews myself. You do that, Michael, David said. And while you're at it, I want you to review the entire supervisory structure at Terminal 4. This kind of behavior doesn't happen in a vacuum. It festers. It means the culture is broken. Within hours, the full weight of the TAA corporate machine descended on the JFK check-in staff. An HR crisis team, led by Catherine Shaw herself, flew in from the Chicago headquarters. Brenda and Mark were formally notified of the investigation and instructed not to speak to each other. The evidence compiled was damning. The CCTV footage without audio was still powerful. It clearly showed Brenda's initial dismissive body language, the smirk she shared with Mark, and their increasingly aggressive postures as Audrey stood her ground. It showed other passengers staring, and it captured the moment of sheer panic on Brenda's and Mark's faces when David Sterling arrived. The interviews with other staff members were even more revealing. Under the pressure of a direct inquiry from HR and the head of operations, the truth came out. One junior agent admitted reluctantly that Brenda often referred to certain passengers in derogatory terms after they left the counter. She had a set of coded phrases she used with Mark. A code 5 for passengers she deemed low value who were likely flying on points, or a buddy pass, and a code E for those she felt were entitled and didn't belong in the premium cabins. The investigation revealed that Audrey had been classified as a code E. The deep dive into past complaints was the final nail in the coffin. While many had been dismissed by previous station managers as subjective. He said, she said, incidents, a clear pattern emerged when they were aggregated. Over the past 3 years, Brenda Gallagher had received 7 formal complaints. 6 of them were from passengers of color who described her attitude as hostile, accusatory, and demeaning. Mark Jensen was named in 2 of those complaints as having supported her behavior. The system had failed. The complaints were filed, but the culture had protected its own writing them off as disgruntled travelers until it was impossible to ignore. 2 days later, Brenda Gallagher and Mark Jensen were summoned to the TAA corporate offices near the airport for a final meeting. They were not met by their local manager, but by Catherine Shaw. David Sterling was not present. He had made it clear this was now a formal HR process, and his personal connection required him to recuse himself from the final decision, though his initial report served as the primary testimony. The meeting was brief. Catherine laid out the findings in cold, impartial detail, the violation of the TAA Code of Conduct, the falsification of a security threat, the pattern of discriminatory behavior evidenced by past complaints, and the reputational damage to the airline. Transatlantic Airways has a zero-tolerance policy for harassment and discrimination of any kind. Catherine concluded, her voice leaving no room for argument. Your actions were not a misunderstanding. They were a gross violation of the trust placed in you as representatives of this company. As such, your employment is terminated effective immediately for cause. She slid 2 envelopes across the table. Inside were their final paychecks and a letter detailing the reasons for their termination, a document that would make it nearly impossible for them to ever work in a customer-facing role in the airline industry again. Brenda attempted to argue, to plead. 12 years, she said, her voice cracking. I gave this company 12 years of my life, and in 12 minutes you undid all of it, Catherine replied without emotion. You were not fired for one mistake. You were fired for a pattern of behavior that you refused to change, and for a prejudice you brought into our workplace. The meeting is over. They were escorted from the building by security, their careers in aviation finished. The hard karma had hit not with a sudden bang, but with the cold, crushing, and irreversible efficiency of a corporate investigation that had been given unlimited authority to find the truth. A week later, the grey, chaotic concrete of JFK felt like a distant monochrome memory, replaced by the vibrant, historic sprawl of London. From her temporary desk on the 7th floor of the Transatlantic Airways European headquarters, Audrey Thompson had a panoramic view of the manicured runways of Heathrow. The sight of planes taking off and landing, once a simple symbol of her passion, now felt deeply personal. Each smooth departure and graceful arrival was a testament to the complex, invisible web of logistics planning and human effort she was now a part of. Her internship was not just living up to her expectations, it was shattering them. She had been assigned to the network planning division, the team of data-driven soothsayers who decided where TAA flew and when. It was a world of complex algorithms, geopolitical considerations, and razor-thin margins. Initially, some of the senior analysts had been politely reserved, clearly viewing her as the boss's niece on a work experience holiday. But that perception had evaporated within her first 48 hours. Her mentor, a sharp, fast-talking analyst named Alistair Finch, had given her what he thought was a simple task: collate performance data on their 3 daily flights from London to New York. Audrey had returned not just with the collated data, but with a multi-tabbed spreadsheet complete with pivot tables and a concise 3-page report. In it, she highlighted a subtle but persistent pattern of delays on the evening flight, TAA 104. She had cross-referenced the delays with cargo manifests and realized the flight was consistently overloaded with high-priority freight, causing longer loading times that cascaded into late departures. She tentatively proposed a model that shifted a small portion of that non-time-sensitive cargo to the less crowded afternoon flight, projecting it would improve TAA 104's on-time performance by nearly 18% without any additional cost. Alistair had stared at her report, then at her, his customary cynicism melting into sheer astonishment. He immediately took it to his director. By the end of the week, they were running a simulation based on the Thompson model, and Audrey was invited to sit in on the weekly strategy meeting, an honor typically reserved for senior staff. She wasn't just David Sterling's niece anymore. She was the brilliant intern who had solved the TAA 104 puzzle. The respect she received from her colleagues was no longer just polite. It was earned. That Friday, David took her to dinner at a sleek restaurant perched atop a skyscraper in the city, offering a breathtaking, glittering view of the Thames, snaking through the heart of London. The Shard pierced the night sky to their left, and the iconic silhouette of Tower Bridge was bathed in golden light to their right. It was a world away from everything she had known, a rarefied air she was finally breathing on her own terms. "I heard about your cargo optimization model," David said, a proud smile touching his lips as he unfolded his napkin. "Alistair called me. He said, and I quote, 'I don't know what you're paying her, but it isn't enough.'" Audrey blushed, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the restaurant's ambiance. I just saw a pattern in the numbers. Seeing the pattern is one thing, David countered. Knowing what to do with it is another. That's talent, Audrey. You have it. Their food arrived, and for a while they ate in comfortable silence, enjoying the view and the quiet hum of the restaurant. Then David set his fork down, his expression turning more serious. I spoke with Catherine Shaw this afternoon. He began, his voice calm and measured. The HR investigation at JFK is officially closed. Brenda Gallagher and Mark Jensen were terminated for cause. Audrey stopped eating the news, settling over her. She didn't feel the surge of vindictive joy she might have expected. Instead, a complex, somber wave of emotions washed over her. It was justice, yes, but it felt heavy. For cause. What does that mean, exactly? It means their dismissal was a direct result of gross misconduct, David explained. It's noted permanently in their employee record. It will make it extraordinarily difficult for them to find another position in this industry. Catherine's team was thorough. They found a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior in past complaints that had been inexcusably overlooked by local management. Your experience, Audrey, wasn't an isolated incident. It was the one that finally broke the dam. She processed this, the image of Brenda's panicked face flashing in her mind. I didn't want them to lose their jobs, she said quietly, almost ashamed to admit it. I just wanted them to listen, to see me. David reached across the table, his gaze full of understanding. I know you did. But their jobs weren't your responsibility. Their actions were. And my responsibility as a leader in this company is to ensure that every single passenger who walks up to a TAA counter is treated with dignity. We failed you that day. And when there's a failure that's systemic, you don't just patch the hole. You rebuild the foundation. He continued. This goes beyond 2 employees. The JFK station manager has been formally censured. The entire ground staff for the North American sector. Every agent, every supervisor, every manager is being mandated to complete a new intensive DEI training program built from the ground up by a third-party consulting firm. It's already being called the Sterling Mandate around the office. He gave a wry smile. My name is attached to it, but you are the reason it exists. You shouldn't feel guilty, Audrey. You should feel proud. You forced a multi-billion-dollar corporation to become better. Tears pricked at her eyes, but this time they were not of humiliation or fear. I'm sorry it caused so much trouble for you, she whispered. Stop, he said, gently but firmly. Do not apologize for the trouble their prejudice caused. You stood your ground with a grace I'm not sure I would have possessed at your age. Or even now. You were strong. He leaned in his voice, dropping slightly. When I started in this business 30 years ago in a junior role in cargo logistics, there were meetings I walked into where I was the only black person in the room. I could feel the questioning stares, the surprise that I was the one there to give the briefing. I learned early on that I had to be twice as prepared, twice as sharp just to be considered equal. It's not fair, but it's a reality I had to navigate. It was the most he had ever spoken of his own struggles, and it forged a new, deeper connection between them. When they looked at you, he continued, his eyes locking with hers, and they questioned your right to hold that ticket. They weren't just questioning you. They were questioning me and everyone who looks like us. They were enforcing an old, ugly idea about who belongs in certain spaces. Never let anyone ever make you feel that you don't belong. Your talent, your intelligence, and your character are what determine your place in this world. You belong in any seat you earn, whether it's seat 2A on this airline or a seat at the head of the boardroom table. Don't you ever let anyone's ignorance make you forget that. On her last day, Audrey presented her findings on the TAA 104 cargo issue to the entire network planning team, including the vice president for the European sector. She spoke clearly and confidently, walking them through her data and her proposed solution. When she finished, there wasn't just polite applause. There was a genuine buzz of excitement and a barrage of thoughtful questions. Alistair Finch stood at the back, beaming like a proud father. After the meeting, the VP, a formidable woman named Eleanor Vance, pulled her aside. That was one of the most impressive intern presentations I've seen in my 15 years. Here, she said. David wasn't exaggerating about you. We have a highly competitive graduate engineering and logistics program. It's by application only, but for you, there's a standing offer. Once you finish your degree, there's a job waiting for you here, Audrey. Don't even think about working for another airline. Flying home, sitting in seat 2A. Once again, Audrey felt a profound sense of peace. The check-in process at Heathrow had been seamless, the agent greeting her with a warm, professional smile. The journey that had started with such ugliness was ending in triumph. The incident at JFK was no longer just a painful footnote. It had become a crucible, a trial by fire that had forged her resolve and clarified her purpose. It taught her about the cruel realities of prejudice, but it also taught her about the power of allies, the importance of systemic change, and the deep, unshakable strength she possessed within herself. She was not just a girl who had been wronged. She was a young woman who had sparked a revolution, however small, and had unequivocally, indisputably, earned her place in the sky. The story of Audrey Thompson isn't just about a satisfying moment of karma. It's a powerful reminder that our assumptions have real-world consequences. Brenda and Mark didn't just make a mistake. They chose to act on a prejudice, and in doing so, they revealed a deeper problem that needed to be fixed. Audrey's story shows us the importance of standing your ground, even when you feel powerless, and the incredible impact that one person in a position of authority can have when they choose to do the right thing. It's a testament to the idea that dignity is not a privilege of a chosen few, but the right of all. If this story resonated with you and reminds you that bullies and bigots don't always win, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs to see that justice can and does prevail. And be sure to subscribe for more true stories of accountability and incredible life lessons. What would you have done in Audrey's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. We want to hear your voice.